My name is Bella Langford. I am 30 years old, and tonight I stood frozen in a sea of designer gowns and expensive champagne as a security guard was ordered to escort me out of the gala, held in my late father's name. She must be one of the servers, my stepmother, Victoria, announced loudly, her voice dripping with false confusion. Her daughter, Aubrey, my stepsister, stood beside her with her phone raised, already recording my humiliation. The guests turned their polished shoes, scraping against marble faces, full of condescension and curiosity. I had received a printed invitation. I had walked through those doors, with my head high, determined not to let these people see how much their betrayal still burned. But this was not a misunderstanding. It was a setup. Victoria smirked, whispering to the band, to pause the music as she stepped into the spotlight. "If you are not on staff, dear, then I suggest you join the guests." Through the proper entrance, she added to laughter. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. Even the security guard hesitated as I tried to explain, clutching my evening bag, pulling out the invite, my voice trembling but clear. I was invited. He looked to her, not to me. That is when I realized I was not just unwelcome, I was entertainment. No one, not a single soul in that ballroom spoke up for me. They all watched complicit as Victoria erased me once again, just like she had after my father's funeral, just like she had when she rewrote my place in the Langford family. I was shaking, furious, humiliated beyond words. But then the ballroom doors opened, and he walked in. My husband, Nathan Langford. The man none of them knew I married 2 years ago. The man quietly funding the very gala they used to try to humiliate me. He strode in tall, calm, and deadly serious. The room went dead silent. If you have ever been dismissed by your own family, made to feel like less cast aside in front of strangers, then stay with me. You need to hear what happened next. Because that night they tried to embarrass me. Instead, I became unforgettable. The silence that fell over the ballroom when Nathan appeared was not just shock, it was fear wrapped in glitter and lace. Victoria's smirk disappeared faster than the color from Aubrey's face. Nathan did not have to raise his voice. His presence did it all. Calmly, he walked over to me, took my trembling hand, and faced the crowd. "This is my wife, Bella Langford," he said. "And the reason this event exists tonight." Gasps rippled across the room like a crack through glass. Nathan, ever composed, continued. "My foundation funded this gala under anonymous terms. Until now." He looked at Victoria and Aubrey. "And it is truly unfortunate that the very people who claim to care about legacy and charity treat their own family like disposable trash." I had never heard him speak like that before, cold, sharp, almost surgical. For the first time in my life, I felt protected. The room stood still. Not one person moved. It was the kind of moment you dream of if you have ever been wronged so deeply that forgiveness is no longer even a consideration. Victoria stammered something about misunderstanding and confusion, trying to save face, but no one believed her anymore. Aubrey's phone, still clutched in her hand, was no longer recording. She just stared at me like I had turned into someone unrecognizable. Maybe I had. What they never knew, what they never cared to ask, was what happened to me after they erased me from my own father's life. After my father passed, Victoria ensured I got nothing but a thin check labeled tuition support. I was told my father believed I needed to learn the value of hard work. That was the last lie I let them write about me. The truth: Victoria manipulated him, rewrote his will, and threw me out within days. I left with a duffel bag, no home and no family. But I did not disappear. I built something, quietly, without their permission or validation. Tonight they tried to remind me of my place, and I showed them it was far, far above theirs. If any part of you has ever been made to feel small, overlooked, or replaceable by your own blood, share your story in the comments. You are not alone. Subscribe to the channel for more real stories about betrayal, quiet revenge, and rising from the ashes. Your voice matters. Your strength inspires. Let's grow this community. Comment, subscribe, and share to fuel the fire behind stories like mine. The moment Nathan introduced me to the crowd, it was like centuries of silence shattered. People who had not spoken my name in years suddenly remembered how to pronounce it. They whispered and stared, calculating how their snide remarks and passive insults might come back to haunt them. I stood taller, holding Nathan's hand like an anchor, but inside my chest was burning, not with shame, but with something far more dangerous. Clarity. After the initial shock faded and the murmurs swelled to cautious conversation, Nathan leaned over and whispered, "Do you want to stay?" I scanned the room, faces of people who once laughed at my pain, who sided with Victoria, because it was easier than questioning her cruelty. I remembered all the birthdays I spent alone, the college holidays, when no one called the engagement they never acknowledged. And then I looked at the banner behind the stage, the Langford Foundation Gala, honoring Thomas Langford's legacy, my father. A man who loved me once until Victoria made sure he forgot how. "I want to stay," I replied. "I deserve to be here." And I did. Nathan gave a brief speech thanking the attendees for supporting the gala and pledged a future donation, this time under both our names. He made it very clear the Langford legacy included me now, whether they liked it or not. Victoria's face was tight with fury, but she said nothing. What could she say? Her lies had no place left to hide. Later, I walked through the room on my own. I made polite conversation. I smiled. I even clinked glasses with people who once pretended not to see me. And as I did, I remembered the years it took to rebuild from nothing. I remembered working 3 jobs while finishing my master's degree in nonprofit management. I remembered scraping together the first down payment for my gallery, the tiny victories that no one clapped for. And I remembered the day I met Nathan when I was tired, covered in paint, and utterly unaware that someone would one day look at me like I was everything. Victoria once told me I would never be anything without her, that I was an accident in her perfect world. But tonight, in front of everyone she once held captive, I proved her wrong. Stay with me, because this is only the beginning of how I took everything they tried to steal and turned it into something far more powerful than revenge. As I stood near the gallery of photos that detailed my father's philanthropic journey, my eyes landed on a picture that stopped me cold. It was the last family photo taken before he passed, one where I had been deliberately cropped out. There was Victoria smiling like a saint, her hand resting on my father's shoulder. Aubrey was front and center, and where I once stood, a bouquet of flowers now filled that space. I remembered that day vividly. I wore a navy dress I had bought on clearance and had driven 4 hours to make it on time. That photo was proof of the rewriting, the erasure that began long before my father's death and continued long after. They had turned my presence into an inconvenience, my very existence edited out like a stain on their polished image. And still I stayed that night. Not out of pride, but because I wanted them to feel what it meant when the one they cast aside stood her ground. I wanted every fake smile, every forced handshake, every wide-eyed Bella I had no idea to burn into their memory. Because here is what they did not know: I never came to crash their gala. I came to reclaim what was mine. Not just my name, but the truth. And the truth was, while they threw money into legacy projects to mask their guilt, I had built my own kind of legacy, quieter perhaps, but rooted in something real. Nathan and I had already begun funding community arts programs under my name. We had quietly purchased the Langford family's abandoned estate 2 years earlier when Victoria defaulted on taxes. She never knew it was me. I had it restored not for revenge, but to preserve the one place where I used to feel seen, my father's library. The very room Victoria had once locked me out of now held my initials engraved above the hearth. Later that night, while guests enjoyed dessert, I asked to say a few words. There was hesitation, but who would deny the wife of the evening's benefactor? I took the microphone. "I was not supposed to be here tonight," I began. Not because I was uninvited, but because for years I was made to believe I did not belong. I was taught to disappear. But what happens when the person you erased refuses to vanish? Silence. Tonight is not about money. It is about memory. And I remember everything. Their eyes followed me now, not with pity, but with fear. Because I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was the storm they never saw coming. And I was just getting started. As I handed back the microphone, There was a brief moment, just a flicker, when I locked eyes with Victoria. She looked as though she had seen a ghost, or maybe the shadow of the woman she tried so hard to erase. Her lips curled slightly, as if preparing to strike, but she said nothing. Not here. Not with donors all around, not with the whispers already growing. I had outmaneuvered her in the one place she thought she held control: perception. But perception is a fragile thing, especially when you have buried the truth beneath so many lies. Nathan placed his hand on my back and leaned close. "You just detonated a bomb, Bella." I smiled, not out of pride, but out of peace. For once I had not shrunk to fit into someone else's illusion of worth. I had spoken my truth, and for the first time in years I felt lighter. But I was not done. I knew Victoria. She would retreat tonight, but she would not surrender. Her game was always the long one, smiling in public, while tightening the noose in private. What she did not realize was that I had learned from the best. I knew how to wait. I knew how to document. I had been doing it for years. Emails, bank records, even audio clips. I had quietly compiled every incident of manipulation, financial abuse, and deceit she committed after my father's passing. She had siphoned charitable funds into shell organizations. She had funneled money through dummy accounts. She used the Langford Foundation as her personal piggy bank. And I had it all. The next morning, I sent the package, confidential, time-stamped, and fully notarized, to the board of the foundation and copied the state's attorney general's office. I did not even need to write a cover letter. The evidence spoke for itself. 2 days later, Victoria was asked to step down pending investigation. The woman who once told me I would never be more than a stray my father pitied was now splashed across headlines: Langford widow, accused of misappropriation of funds. I did not celebrate. I simply sat in my studio with a cup of chamomile tea and watched the sunrise. People began calling, of course. Family members, distant cousins. Even Aubrey reached out suddenly, so sorry for how everything had gone down. But I had learned my lesson. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is drawing a line so clearly in the sand that no one dares step over it again. What they took from me was not just a childhood or an inheritance, it was a sense of belonging. But what I reclaimed was infinitely more powerful clarity, purpose, and a voice they could no longer silence. And in the quiet of that morning, I realized something else. Revenge was never about making them suffer. It was about making sure they never had the power to define me again. I did not expect silence to be so loud. After Victoria's downfall became public, I waited for the anger to bubble up, the sense of vindication to boil over, but none of it came. What filled me instead was a quiet stillness, a kind of peace I had never known, like walking out of a long storm and realizing the sun had been waiting all along. The noise, the chaos, the years of biting my tongue just to keep the peace, they no longer dictated the rhythm of my life. I had stepped out of the role they wrote for me. I was finally living on my own terms. But freedom has a strange way of feeling unfamiliar when all you have ever known is control. I found myself questioning everything: who I was, what I wanted, and where I belonged, now that the ties binding me to the Langford name had frayed. For so long I defined myself in contrast to them, in resistance, in silence, in survival. Now I wanted something more than escape. I wanted purpose. I returned to the restored Langford estate, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a woman reclaiming space. The library, once the heart of the home, had been untouched by their cold renovations. It smelled like memory, old paper cedar shelves, and my father's cologne, faint in the corners. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, tracing my fingers over the spines of the books he once read to me. I cried not out of grief, but because for the first time I felt him there, not as a ghost of the past, but as a guide toward the future. That night, I launched the Langford Legacy Initiative under my own name, Bella Langford Reed, a foundation dedicated to funding scholarships for children who, like me, were told they did not belong. It was not revenge, it was rebirth, a new legacy carved from the ashes of the one they tried to bury me in. Aubrey sent flowers, white lilies, and a card that read, I am sorry for everything. I left them on the front steps. Some things do not deserve space inside your home once you finally make it safe again. My therapist had once said, closure is not something they give you, it is something you create. She was right. Closure is deleting the voicemails, declining the invitations, changing your locks, and keeping your peace. It is knowing that some people will only ever show up when they want to rewrite history, but you do not owe them a pen. So I made a choice, not to forgive, not to forget, but to flourish. And as the sun poured through the library windows, I sat beneath the same beam of light I used to read under as a girl, and whispered to the silence, I am home. I thought that was the end of it. I truly did. After reclaiming my voice and launching the Langford Legacy Initiative, I assumed the rest would fade, the drama, the names, the tension. But sometimes when you shine, you do not just illuminate your own path, you expose the shadows around others. And apparently, my glow had become blinding for some. A week after the Gala fallout and Victoria's resignation, I received a message from a number I did not recognize. We need to talk. It's about your father. No name. Just that single jarring line. I nearly deleted it, but something made my fingers hesitate. I replied with one word when we met at a quiet cafe in the South End where no one would recognize me. And there he was, Christopher Langford, my father's estranged brother. I had not seen him since I was a child, back before Victoria had shut him out of the family for being untrustworthy. That was her word. Now I could see the years in his face, the fatigue, the shame, and something else, truth. I stayed away because your father asked me to, he began quietly. Not because I wanted to. I folded my arms, unsure if I could believe anything anymore. But he pushed forward. Before he died, he suspected Victoria was manipulating his accounts. I tried to help him. But then, he changed his will. That caught my breath. Christopher pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of documents my father had supposedly updated months before his death, leaving a substantial portion of his assets to me, not Victoria. But the version that went through probate had none of that. He trusted the wrong lawyer, Christopher said. One Victoria handpicked. My world tilted again. Not only had they humiliated me, they had likely robbed me of what was rightfully mine. My revenge had only scratched the surface of their betrayal. And suddenly, the justice I thought I had achieved felt painfully incomplete. I did not want to go back to court. I did not want another public battle. But I owed it to my father. And more importantly, I owed it to the girl I used to be, the one who sat in that cold house and wondered if she mattered. With Christopher's help, I assembled a new legal team. We began gathering evidence of forgery and fraud, interviewing old staff, even tracking down that original lawyer. It became clear Victoria had orchestrated everything with surgical precision. But I had changed. I was not a helpless pawn anymore. I was a strategist. I was a woman with a voice, resources, and most dangerous to them, a following. They underestimated me once. They would not make that mistake again. People assume revenge is loud, a slamming door, a shouted truth, a courtroom outburst that makes jaws drop. But the most satisfying kind of revenge is quiet. It is precise. It unfolds like a symphony, every note deliberate, every silence deafening. That was how I approached it. Not as the angry daughter they had underestimated, but as the woman they never saw coming. Victoria thought she had buried the truth. She had not counted on the girl she tried to erase becoming the woman who would undo her. My legal team moved quickly. Christopher helped fund the investigation, while I handled the digital trail. Emails, account transfers, confidential memos with time-stamped edits that revealed forged will clauses. One line at a time, we built a case so airtight that even the family's most loyal allies began to retreat. Victoria's image, the polished philanthropist, the grieving widow, began to crumble under the weight of truth. The breaking point came when we subpoenaed the original attorney who had handled the Langford estate. A junior paralegal from the firm came forward anonymously, armed with documents that had been deleted, altered, and buried. She said she had stayed quiet out of fear, but could not sleep at night, knowing what she had seen. Her file included scans of the original will, signed notarized, and clearly designating me as the primary beneficiary. I remember staring at that document, hands shaking, not because of what it meant financially, but because it was the final piece of my father's voice I had been searching for. He had not forgotten me. He had tried to protect me even in the end, and Victoria had stolen that from both of us. We filed formal charges: defamation, fraud, forgery, embezzlement. Victoria was arrested without warning at her own foundation's board meeting. A photo of her being led out in handcuffs in her signature cream blazer and pearl earrings hit the front page of the Boston Globe. No amount of charity dinners could undo that image. The board voted unanimously to remove her, and I was asked to return not as a daughter, but as a guest speaker to share the truth. I walked in through the front door she once locked me out of. This time, the security guard opened it for me. The same women who whispered behind my back now clapped. But I was not there for applause. I was there for something deeper. After the talk, I stood alone by the foundation's fountain, built in my father's name, and let the wind carry my silence. I did not feel rage. I felt release. Revenge had been the spark, but truth had been the fire that lit the path to peace. People always ask if it was worth it. Yes. Because some legacies are not inherited, they are rebuilt. Brick by brick. Truth by truth. And I was just getting started. When the court officially restored my rightful inheritance and name to the Langford legacy, people expected celebration. Some sent flowers. A few emailed apologies. A distant cousin even offered to reconnect over coffee. But I did not feel like celebrating. I felt like breathing. For the first time in years, I was not gasping for validation or clinging to broken family ties. I was simply free. Victoria pled guilty to avoid a drawn-out trial, but the damage to her reputation was irreversible. She lost everything she once wielded to control others' power, prestige, position. I did not need to humiliate her further. Watching the mask slip was enough. My revenge had never been about destruction, it had been about exposure. And I had exposed it all. What surprised me most was how quiet peace felt. I had imagined closure would come with a bang, a dramatic ending, worthy of the chaos she caused. But healing is quiet. It is mornings when I wake up and no longer question if I am enough. It is walking into a room and not shrinking. It is looking at my reflection and not seeing a project that needs fixing, but a woman who finally owns her story. In the months that followed, I declined interviews, awards, and book offers. Instead, I created a grant under my father's name, the Langford Foundation for Integrity. It funds legal education for young women from underserved backgrounds. I wanted to turn the ashes of what Victoria tried to burn down into something useful, something lasting, something mine. Christopher and I began rebuilding our bond, slowly, coffee meetings, phone calls, shared memories. There was pain there, yes, but also room for reconciliation. The kind built not on obligation, but on mutual respect and truth. As for my mother, she sent a letter. Handwritten. No apology. Just 4 lines that began with, "You always had a flair for the dramatic." I folded it without reading the rest. Her silence had been louder than any words she could have written, and I was done listening to echoes of people who never saw me. I wish I could say everything is perfect now that I ride off into the sunset with justice and peace holding my hands. But life does not wrap up like that. I still have questions. I still feel sadness. But I also have space, real, unshakable space to build a future, not built from revenge, but from power, choice, and purpose. So if you are watching this and wondering if it is too late to reclaim your story, let this be your sign. You do not need their approval to rise. You do not need their apology to move on. You just need your truth and the courage to speak it. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is not what you take back. It is what you become. If this story moved, you drop a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe. Your voice helps fuel more stories like this one.